The raven came at dusk, when the fog over Blackwater Bay lay in milky sheets and the city's bells tolled for vespers. It sat upon the redstone sill of the Tower of the Hand and pecked the iron with a sound like a thin blade worrying old mail. Jon Snow unsealed the tube and drew out parchment that smelled faintly of brine and dragonfire. A narrow hand had written in an ink the color of dark wine, "Come if you would know what was left, and what may yet be woken. The maps are wrong, the winds are not. Sail east until the moon is a shard and follow the smoking sea where compasses fail. When you smell brimstone through your sleeve and hear old tongues in the foam, you are close enough to choose." No name was signed, yet there was a coil of scale pressed into the wax, black as night, thin as a fingernail and warm to Jon's touch. He stood with it between finger and thumb, thinking of ghosts no maester would name. The room was narrower than he remembered, or perhaps it was he who had grown too broad for rooms. Down the corridor the child laughed, the laugh that had come like rain after long drought, the laugh that had surprised him the first time, as if joy had stolen upon him unawares. Daenerys had named the boy Rhaegar, and when she said the name she did not tremble. She had learned to say it the way a smith says iron. Behind Jon the fire was low, its embers netted in black. The city outside sang an evening song of hawkers and whores, and somewhere far to the south the sea moved like a restless thought. He turned the scale over once more and felt in it the memory of heat. Old Valyria, the words were a pit under the tongue. He had grown up where words had roofs and stones, where winter meant the world squeezing its belt and looking at you with cold eyes. Valyria was a word with no roof. He pictured a drowned palace still aglow, corridors of obsidian and gold leaning like old ships, banners petrified into the stone of the sky. He pictured bones the size of towers and rivers that steamed in summer. He pictured the oath he had made to a woman with silver hair, and the promise he had made to himself when steel met blue fire above a city of bells. When Daenerys entered, the raven hopped once and shook frost from its feathers. She wore a gown of smoke and pearl, the color of the sea before a storm. In her hands she held the boy, and in her eyes the borderlands between sleep and watchfulness. "Another summons," she said, and when he held out the scrap of scale she touched it with 2 fingers. "Not from Dragonstone." "No," he handed her the letter, and as she read he watched the way her mouth softened, then closed. The boy fretted, then quieted at the sound of her humming. An old song that was not Westerosi, its syllables braided like river weeds. "They would lure us into a graveyard," she said at last. "Half the world says that place is a wound that won't knit. The other half says it is a door," Jon said. She looked beyond him to the fire, to the chipped helm above it, to the ghost of a wolf that sometimes walked between the flames when the hour was too late for lying. "You are thinking of it." He did not pretend otherwise. "The world wearies quickly of peace. We have mended much that was torn, and there is much that will tear again. The lords have taken their oaths, Storm's End, Highgarden, Sunspear, but oaths are not anchors. A realm needs stone. We rebuilt the dragon pit," she said almost to herself. "The dome is new. The hills took our blood. And the dragons," Jon said, "they grow. They roam farther each season. There will be another drought, another winter, another lord who thinks a dragon is a cup he can drink from without being burned. We can rule from this seat, but this seat will never sit easy under dragons. Old Valyria." He let the word fall like a coin into a deep well. "If there is truth in the letter, there may be caverns, forges, rookeries that know what ours have forgotten. A place dragons were meant to fly from. Or a place made to swallow kings," she said. She kissed Rhaegar's hair and passed him to Jon, and the baby's fist closed around the laces of Jon's jerkin with a soldier's determination. "I will not go to a place that makes you another ghost." "Nor I you," Jon said. They stood with the child between them and listened to the winter wind at the shutters. The raven had closed one eye and looked like a draftsman's mistake in the corner of the window. Jon felt, as he too often felt in that tower, that everything had been a prelude to another door. He had walked out of 1,000 doors, Winterfell's bitter oak, Castle Black's splintered pine, the black gate with a tongue of ice, the tent flap that opened on a storm of bells. He had walked through death and found himself alive on the other side. The door before him was hot. "Then we go together," she said, in the voice she used when decisions ceased to be decisions and became roads. "But not like supplicants. If we go as claimants. If there is a throne in those ruins, it is ours or no one's. We will not tiptoe through a tomb." He smiled, small and helpless and real. "Then we go as dragon and wolf," he said. And the boy in his arms laughed again because the word wolf made music of air. The next dawn broke on a city of sails. The harbor was a thicket of masts and gulls. Fishermen watched as the royal fleet stirred like a school of shadowfish. Black hulls rising and dipping, light catching on the curve of catheads and the gilt of figureheads. The flagship was a long, lean galley refitted at Driftmark. Her name was the Dawnflame, though John had never liked naming a thing for what it hoped it was. He preferred names that did not boast, that lived with their heads down and their hands sure. Ghost had been such a name, and he had never spoken it without feeling his throat catch. Drogon came when called, scything the air like a dark thought. Regal and Viserion's last children, those strange golden and green hat. Klings who had taken to perching on the rooftops of Flea Bottom like watchmen, left the city in a shriek of wind that tumbled washing and scattered pigeons. 3 other dragons circled above them, older now, scarred from the falls and scrimmages of young skylords. The city's bells rang again, and this time it was not vesper but astonishment. They sailed with a brisk wind to the stepstones and beyond. Westerman sailors, proud of their salt, paled and kept the sign of the stranger close when the smoking sea hove into view. A hammered plate of dull iron where the water steamed even in winter and the air tasted of struck stone. Compasses danced, and the sky took on the look of weather drawn by a madman. Patches of sunlight under a roof of cloud, wind from no direction twice, rain so warm it felt like sweat. At dusk on the 3rd day, the moon became the shard the letter had promised, and on the 4th day at noon they smelled brimstone like a smithy gone to sea. Daenerys stood at the prow with her hair braided back and her hand on the rail. Jon watched her nostrils flare, watched the old world move under her skin. The dragons were restless. Drogon's tail lashed. The golden-green pair banked and turned, crying to the vapor. The sailors murmured and were quiet. Then came the voice. It was not a voice, but something that wore a voice the way smoke wears the shape of the fire it leaves. It came from the water, or the clouds, or from the bottom of Jon's throat. He could taste ash on his molars when it spoke. The words were not Westerosi. They were older than the wall and older than the figs in Old Town's gardens. Yet he understood them, as one understands a blade's intention without translating its steel. The seafloor heaved, and a column of steam rose like a white tower. In it he saw, or thought he saw, a city's bones, 1,000 windows blind and broken, fire walking the stairs beneath the water. Daenerys raised her hand and answered in a language she had learned in a house with a red door, the language of her house when it had been a house instead of a rumor. "We are blood of the dragon. We come to take back what was lost." The steam writhed, and the voice became more intimate. It seemed to crawl under Jon's skin until he could not tell whether it spoke to them or to something inside him that had been waiting to be spoken to. "Come," it said. "If you are blood, you will not be unmade. If you are not, you cannot be made. Come and be weighed." "Anchor," Jon said, because it was what captains said, and he needed the small necessity of orders to keep himself from being no more than a listener. The anchors tumbled into the sea with the weight of old guilt. The ships turned and steadied and lay like dogs sleeping under a hand. The boats went down with 30 oars each, black as crow wings. Jon and Daenerys entered the first, their child left sobbing and then smiling in Missandei's arms. Davos Seaworth, who had been a smuggler, a knight, a hand, and a father, climbed down beside them, cursing under his breath only once. Grey Worm sat just behind Jon with a spear across his knees and a face like a shuttered window. They rowed toward a seam in the fog. On either side, the sea steamed as if furious at a slight. Jon felt the oarsmen pull, heard the old creak of thole-pins, saw the sweat on men's throats. He did not look back because you do not look back when you enter a myth, You do not ask whether the world is watching or has gone on without you. You go forward until forward has ended. The fog broke like cloth torn by a spear point, and there it lay. Valyria was ash in architecture, its spires bitten by storms and its colonnades sunk to the knee in a sea that clutched at marble with black fingers. The sun lit it from a side as if reluctant to face it fully. There were domes split like skulls and causeways thrust out of the water like ribs. There were streets paved in mosaics whose patterns had loosened into snakes, and in the center of what might once have been a market stood the trunk of a tree turned to stone and then to something beyond stone, reflective like frozen smoke. Everywhere, tongues of white steam leapt and flicked back into vents that sighed like sleepers. And on all of it, wind that carried a smell John knew from a forge and from other places where heat and fate met. The voice in the fog was gone. In its place, there was a silence that had pronouncements in it. Drogon came low and slow, folded his wings, and landed on a broken stair that must once have led to a palace. The stone took his weight as if it had been reheated just long enough to understand. He lowered his head and snuffed at a carving half melted into an obscene grace. 2 dragons in union, long-necked and lidded, their wings making a vault of shadow over a kneeling woman holding a crown. Daenerys disembarked with her feet sure, though the rocks were breathing warm and cold. Grey Worm stepped on land with the look of a man checking doors he had already locked twice. Jon followed, and the land did not buck him off. It had the feel of a horse that would bear you if you were the sort it consented to bear. He put his hand on the pommel of Longclaw without thinking and then took it away because steel drawn without need makes the gods pay too much attention. They climbed the broken stair. Men followed with shields and wary eyes. Davos took one long, theatrical look around and muttered, "7 save us from the folly of kings," and then climbed as if he were younger than most of the men. At the top lay a courtyard whose paving stones had been lifted and dropped by some giant hand. In its center stood a basin, and in the basin not water but a kind of glass that moved. It lay there like a mirror that remembered being rivers. Under it something gleamed. It was not gold or jewel. It was an emptiness shaped like a throne. Daenerys knelt without being told to kneel. Her hair slid over her shoulder like silk over steel. She put her palm on the moving glass, and in front of Jon's eyes the glass clouded and cleared like breath on a visor. He saw ships launching from black keys, saw teenagers with purple eyes racing along parapets, saw a smith with a hammer that left no sound and a robe of light that moved as if it were thinking. He saw dragons laid on beds of coals by women with hands like chalices. He saw a crown that was too heavy for any head but the world's. He caught his breath when he saw winter. Valyria had known winter only as a story, yet there it was. A frost that came not from sky but from deep chambers, a blue that knew his name. He saw, or thought he saw, a blade he had carried and left, then carried and lost, then carried again when there was no name left for carrying except duty. "Do you see it?" Daenerys whispered. "Yes," he said, "and I see that we are not the first to come back." She lifted her hand. The mirror stilled. The wind felt like a hand on Jon's neck. He looked up at the edges of the court where gargoyles had slumped into something that was part gargoyle, part wave. In their mouths small fires lived like birds. "The letter promised choice," she said. "We came to choose. If this city will have us, it must say it in a voice I trust." "Cities speak with people," Jon said. "If there are any." "There are," said a voice behind them, and Jon did not start because he had smelled the stranger's breath as soon as the sentence began. It smelled of olives and smoke and a long time on lonely shores. They turned. A woman stood in the shadow of a broken colonnade, her cloak sewn of many colors, none of them the expensive sort. Her hair was the color of driftwood, and her eyes were the muddy green that rivers wear before their mouths. She carried a staff and a sack, and at her belt hung a knife that had cut more rope than meat. "You have taken your time," she said conversationally. "I sent for you when the vents began speaking in the tongue of your house. I do not like it when stones speak in any tongue." "You sent the raven," Jon said. She shrugged. "A bird, yes. The ravens that go to King's Landing have forgotten how to be free birds, but they remember the way. My name is Era. I was born in a town that sank on a day when nobody expected the tide to be so ambitious. I study stones that do not lie and fire that does. I am not of your house. I am of this place and not of it. You are a storyteller, Davos said, and she smiled with too many teeth. I am a cartographer of places where you cannot keep a map in your head, she said. The stones change their mind. The vents lift streets and turn them into footnotes. But there is an island that was once the heart of the heart. I have wanted to take no one to it. Yet for you, dragon woman with a winter man at your side, I will take you, if you will let me bind your skin with chalk, if you will let me put my words under your tongues. Otherwise the city will read you, and when it has finished reading you, there will be fewer words in the world. Bind us, Daenerys said at once. Jon glanced at Grey Worm, whose eyes said that he would die without complaint but preferred not to die because a stranger drew squares on his commander's cheeks. Jon looked at the child, far away on the deck of a black ship, and felt the hot cold of fear. Bind us, he said, but know that we do not come as petitioners. You come as returners, Aerys said. That is worse. Petitions can be folded and forgotten. Returns bring the past into rooms where the present was content with its chairs. She drew lines on their faces with chalk that smelled not at all like chalk and murmured songs that moved like sand when the tide leaves. She spoke of gates that were not doors, of rooms that were smaller when you stood in them than when you looked at them from outside. She spoke the name of fire as if it were an acquaintance who did not always answer. They crossed bridges that were not bridges and courtyards that had not consented to be courtyards for centuries. They passed statues whose eyes had been replaced by pieces of mirror that reflected not faces but futures. They walked through a market where every stall had been melted into the color of regret. Jon carried his sword and did not draw it. He walked with a wolf's patience through a place without wolves. At last, an arch that had spilled and then somehow gathered itself up again. Beyond it, a hall with no roof and a floor that sloped as if the earth beneath it were a drunk waking. In the center of that hall, a chair waited. It was not a throne like the Iron Throne, which was a lesson in too much. It was a chair of bones and black iron, but the bones were not dragon bones and not human. They were the bones of something that had crawled through the hot miles under the city and found shape and then died looking at the moon. The iron had been poured into its gaps and now held it the way resin holds a fly. Aerys stopped. Her smile had gone. This city was not made by men alone, she said quietly. Men built like men build. Straight lines and colonnades and baths that whispered politics. But something under them taught them to build deeper. They sat their kings here when the sky refused the storm. They built far below. They called, and sometimes something answered that was not them and not their gods. If you sit and the chair does not spit you out like a fishbone, you will be what remains of them. If you sit and it does spit you out, you will be fortunate to be a story. Daenerys lowered her head just a fraction, as if to a wind. She walked to the chair as if it were a difficult horse and she its better rider. When she put her hand on the bone iron, the hall breathed. All around them vents whispered. The dragons outside screamed as if sudden air had been pulled from their lungs and replaced with a different air that required different flying. She sat. The chalk lines on her face flared, then went dull. Jon stood with his heart in. His throat and his thumbs pressed to the scars on his palms, as if the memory of knives could hold the present steady. Nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The floor bucked. The walls performed the slow motion of drunken men who intend to fall a long time before they go down. In Jon's nose there was blood and something like cinnamon. In his ears the sea shouted a question. The chair accepted. There was no other word for it. Jon felt it not as a thing he saw but a thing his bones understood. The chair accepted, and because it accepted, the city began to turn. Not physically. It turned in the way a story turns when the right person looks at it. Lines that had been only decorative became intentions. Rooms that had been ruined arranged themselves into riddles that could be answered. Daenerys opened her eyes, and they were wet as if she had cried without the rest of her face knowing. "It knows me," she said, and the words had a thread of terror stretched tight through them. "And it knows me," said another voice. He stepped from behind a fallen pilaster with a limp that had learned to be elegant. His hair had more salt than Jon remembered, and his smile had less. He wore a cloak the color of a faithful bruise and a sword at his side that had been his father's and his father's father's and the father of their lies. Tyrion Lannister bowed with one hand and made as if to kneel with the other, and then did not kneel at all. "I thought you would be dead," he said cheerfully. "Then I thought you would be wise enough to stay away. In the end, I surmised you would come, because kings who have tasted ruin acquire a rude appetite for it." "Why are you here?" Daenerys asked. She did not rise, and the chair seemed to improve her posture, made her look as if she had been carved for it. "Because," Tyrion said, "I made a study of diseases and their cures, and realms are very often the latter. I also made a study of debts. I owed you both one, though it is difficult to remember what is owed when the debtor has a crown." Jon took no offense. It was easier not to take offense when the world was a hall without a roof and steam wrote its short poems on the pillars. "How did you find this path?" "The city wanted me," Tyrion said. "Nothing wants a dwarf as much as a dead city does. I came with a salvage crew from Volantis looking for bronze the way a man looks under old beds for coins. I found mirrors that did not like me and doors that preferred me. Then I found Era, who allowed me to live because I can tell the difference between asking a question of a room and asking a room to become an answer. I wrote to a raven. It is not difficult to find a raven when you have nothing left to lose but boredom." He looked at the chair, at Daenerys, and something passed across his face that was regret or pride or both dressed as one another. "The city accepts you," he said. "Then the question ceases to be whether you will have the city and becomes whether the city will require you to be more than you know you can be." Daenerys' hand closed on the bone iron. She looked at Jon, and the look was from a terrace in Meereen and from a tent near a river of bells and from a night when dragons circled winter. "If this place can be made to live, it will be a pillar that holds what we build in Westeros," she said. "Not a rival, not a secret. We have had secrets enough. A sister capital with a different language, a different law for the sky. Dragons can learn to fly out of here that cannot learn to fly under the eyes of men who call themselves practical." "What would you call this?" Davos asked politely. "Impractical. Sacrament," she said and smiled. "And if we fail, it will be a beautiful ruin. But I did not come here to fail." Jon stepped forward. "The chair knows blood," he said. "But kingdoms are made of more than blood and chairs. There were slaves here. There were wars and demons. To claim this place is not to charm it. It is to wrestle with it. If we do it with laws that bind kings first, with ships that carry food before carrying jewels, with forges that make plowshares before armor, and with keeps where men can speak on barrows to the dead without drowning." "Spoken like a boy who has learned to be a man in cold rooms," Era murmured. "This city will not be scolded into goodness, but it will be made to remember." "Remember what?" Grey Worm asked, the first words he had spoken since they'd entered the hall. "That fire without discipline is only appetite," Era said. "And appetite makes a poor king. So began the labors. They were not 7 nor 12, nor any number fit for a song. They were days and nights that were longer than days. They found tunnels where the air had texture like wool. They found bridges that sang when dragons crossed them, low, content chords. They found that the city indeed could be summoned to shape, but only when it was asked by those whom it had accepted, and only when it was asked in the right way. Daenerys had that way. Jon learned it, as he had learned the language of snow and the etiquette of ghosts. Tyrion learned to translate the city's moods into measures and ordinances, and Davos learned which docks would hold and which would swallow a man in a white grin. Word traveled to places where words grew like weeds. Volantis heard, and its triarchs grew peevish. Karth heard and pretended not to. Braavos heard, and did not smile at the thought of a city risen from a thing it had bet against. The Summer Isles sent envoys in boats lacquered like beetles. The Dothraki, who had never liked the look of walled things, sent a small party of the curious and the brave who touched everything and laughed at nothing. From Meereen came a letter written in the schoolboy hand of a freedman who had turned scribe. We send you grain as a blessing and a mirror polished on both sides so that you may see your face twice as often and remember it is beloved. And Westeros. Some lords praised and some grumbled. They are bred to both. The small folk prayed to gods who were comfortable with markets and asked those gods to add Valyria to their routes. Fishermen looked at the sky for new weather and at the sea for stones that rose where stones had not been before. In King's Landing, the dragon pit became less a memory of a crime and more a cousin to a far house where the wind's commandments were different. The dragons loved Valyria. They flew as if they had been rowing in two small boats for too long and now found a sea. They learned to draft behind columns of warmer air that rose from vents like invisible ladders. They nested in places that had memory of heat. They fought less, not because they were tame, but because the sky itself provided occupation, currents, whirls, games the air played with itself that demanded attention. Droplets of salt beaded their scales and dried in wind-carved lines like writing. Jon would wake at night and go out to a balcony that faced on a yard where the ground was black glass, and he would see Daenerys standing under the wing shadow of a dragon and speaking to it like a mother talks to a child that will be taller than she is. He would stand and watch them, and feel for a moment that the world had conspired to make a picture only for him. A picture of a woman who had made a chair remember, and of a beast who consented to be taught manners by the sky. The challenge came from beneath. Era had warned them in her sideways way. There are caverns that lead to places with no stories, she had said. We do well when we stay in places with stories. Keeps us honest. But those caverns are doorways, and doorways do not like to be unused. The first sign was a change in the tone of the vents. They had hissed and sung and sighed. Now, sometimes at dusk, one would release a sound like bone across a whetstone. The dragons would lift their heads at it and stare east with the fixed attention of hounds who hear a distant horn. The second sign was a tremor that came with no cloud and no steam. It lifted the cups in the hall like small ships and set them down again in slightly different places. When it passed, Jon found his hand on Longclaw's hilt. Daenerys found her hand on the arm of the chair. They looked at one another and did not pretend not to be afraid. The third sign was clear as a banner. In a gallery whose ceiling had fallen and then been taught to stand again by the chair's acceptance, a crack appeared in the floor. It was not like the harmless cracks that come to old houses and make their inhabitants fond of them. It was the kind of crack that looks like a sentence written by a hasty god. From it rose a smell that was not brimstone. It was a sweet, cold smell, like stone washed for a long time by an underground river that had learned to sing a verse and kept it for itself. They went to the gallery with torches and men and dragonfire in their pockets. Era went with them, and so did Tyrion, because men who have learned to live by their wits sometimes prefer to die by them rather than by a cleaner instrument. Grey Worm went, and two of his captains, and Davos, whose luck had always been a kind of punishment. The crack was 2 men wide and deep enough to show nothing. They lowered a lantern until its light side and grew small, and then smaller until it was no longer a lantern but a thought of one, like the memory of a light under a door you told yourself you would not open. We will not fill it, Daenerys said. We cannot salt the sea. We must go down. We must, Tyrion asked, and then nodded because he already knew the answer. Yes, we must, because if we do not, what is below may come up, and I have never known it to be good when what belongs below decides to socialize. They built ropes and ladders and prayers. They tied themselves into a line because it is what men do when they go into a place where the earth is not on their side. They make another earth of one another, and they try to be more faithful than soil. They went down, leaving their dragons above with instructions to scream. The descent was into another kind of heat, close, waterless, the kind that seems to be made of someone else's breath. The walls of the crack were not rough. They had been melted and then cooled, and their sheen took the torchlight without returning it. Jon looked at the chalk on his knuckles and wished he could have put the chalk under his skin. He felt the rope's honest pull at his waist. He heard Daenerys's breath and knew it better than his own. The bottom was not a bottom so much as a shelf, and beyond the shelf a hall that made the hall above it seem like a dress rehearsal. Pillars rose and did not meet anything. The floor was pierced by circles that might once have been wells. On the far side of the hall, a shape lay like a great animal sleeping with its bones outside its skin. Era raised her torch and made a sound that was as close as she would come to swearing. "This is a forge," she said softly. "Not for iron, for language." "What language?" John asked. "The one fire speaks when it convinces stone to do as it is told," she said. "And another, older language that is only spoken when something living lends its throat." They approached the sleeping shape, and as they did it began to resolve. Coils upon coils, a ribcage sunk into glass, a skull that was not skull but a complicated cup. It was not a dragon. It was the idea of a dragon, left unfinished by something that had run out of nerve. Around it lay tools that had not rusted and would not, tools that looked like bones and bones that looked like tools. "Someone tried to make one," Tyrion said, and his voice was steady because men sometimes steady their voices when the rest of them cannot be. "Or to unmake one," Era said. "Or to remember how it was made. And memory is a crueler forge than fire." There were marks on the floor, rings within rings, and at their edges grooves where something had paced until the stone had given in. In the center of the circles a smaller shape lay. John knelt beside it. It was a cup or a cradle, lined with something that had once been soft and was now a suggestion. Near it lay shards of obsidian. Every shard had been carved with a letter. Together they might have spelled a sentence. Scattered, they spelled disaster. "Why show us this?" Daenerys asked of the darkness without roof. "What is your intention?" The darkness breathed. The vents above them answered, very faintly, like sleep talkers. The dragons far above answered, louder. John felt the rope at his waist twitch, and then the floor under his knees moved a careful inch. "Intention," Era said, "is a word men use to pretend that the world has plans. The world has appetites. This place wants to be a forge again. It wants a throat. It wants you to lend it yours." Daenerys stood. She was pale, but it was the kind of paleness that comes when a queen wears her face. "And if we refuse, then it will find another throat," Era said quietly. "Perhaps one you would prefer it not to find." John thought of the envoys and of the letters in two neat hands, of triarchs and archons and men who considered themselves practical. He thought of a child with downy hair and milk on his chin, and of the laugh that had sounded like rain after drought. He thought of a wall he had once kept and of a night when light had moved like a sword. "We do not lend our throats," he said, "but we can learn this language and speak it ourselves. We can make it say what we need." "Which is?" Tyrion asked, half smiling, because questions had been his heels and his armor. "Home," John said simply. "We need this place to be a home, not a weapon. We need dragons grown for sky, not for siege. We need furnaces that bake bread before they bake crowns. We need laws that bind fire to the service of men and never men to the service of fire." "That language has fewer words," Era said, "but they are heavy ones." They set to work. It was work like no work any of them had known. It required patience that laughed at other patiences. It required courage that did not raise its voice. It required Daenerys to sit the chair and ask it for shapes that could carry grain uphill, for kills that would temper clay into plates that did not crack at hot soups, for ducks that would carry steam where it could be tamed. It required Jon to stand in the caverns and repeat phrases until the floor took them into itself and altered their endings so that they would not betray the beginnings. It required Tyrion to write laws for fires, laws that had punishments and teeth and mercy, and to persuade men who had sailed far to bring iron that iron would not be the first use of the first forges. It required Davos to spend his luck as a miser spends copper, and Grey Worm to stand at doors invisible to eyes and yet more vulnerable than any gates on earth. In time, the crack became a stair with no insult in it. In time, the vents changed their music and gave over the sound of bone on stone for a domestic hiss. In time, the dragons learned to fly through shafts of warm air, released with a regularity that made a clock of the sky. In time, the first market opened again, not as a market of slaves or of purpled men and women pretending not to be slaves, but as a market of goods men had made with their hands and then asked fair price for. They found an archive under a lake, its shelves laced with mineral sloe and jealous. The books were not books. They were lengths of beaten metal, thin as birch bark and etched in a script that had loved angles. The script described histories no one living had read. The first bonding of men and dragons not as legend but as record. The laws of flight as articulated by engineers with ink under their nails. The catalog of wingbone fractures and their remedies. The inventories of rookeries. The recipes for a clay that would not shatter when a dragon slept upon a temple roof. And within those plates, tucked like a scandal, a treatise on the making of kings. Not by blood, it claimed, but by acceptance. You could test a king the way you test a chain. Daenerys read until her eyes ached. Jon read until the words' edges blurred. They learned that the chair had accepted her because she asked it for rooms before asking it for rooms of state. Because when the city showed her a weapon, she asked what it would cost the hands that would hold it. Because when the city offered her a river diverted so that her ships could arrive faster, she asked where the fish would go first and whether there would still be fish for men whose children's names she would never know. In the 7th month of their labor, when the figs ripened in the shallow gardens that had been ash pans, a ship arrived from Braavos with a crew that had never eaten a fig and wore the look of men who were accustomed to have their questions answered. They came not as conquerors but as accountants, and their leader wore a mask of plain iron which he removed when he stood before the chair. "The Iron Bank acknowledges a city," he said. "It prefers to acknowledge debts, but it will accept a city. We would know how you mean to secure your future. Cities rise, cities fall, but banks prefer slopes to cliffs." Daenerys looked at him as if he were a sort of dragon she had never met. "You will have bread," she said, "and interest paid with salt and with crafted goods that will outlast coin. You will have a title to nothing that bleeds. If you ask for that, I will feed your contract to my forges, and the smoke will carry your name downwind forever." The Braavosi considered this, and considered the woman, and considered the chair that had not spit her out. "We will take salt," he said gravely, "and plates that do not crack." Other ships came. So did other dangers. New neighbors. It brought ballistae and jars of green fire and men whose shirts had never known honest sweat. The sea accepted their hulls the way a throat accepts wine. But in the straits before the Black Keys, the air changed, slowly, gently, as if it were not weather but suggestion. The ships found their sails unloved by the wind, found the currents contrary, found that their oars loved the water less than the water loved them. Drogon and his kin came down only when the fleet had ceased to be a fleet and had become a set of islands shaped like hubris. Men swam ashore and were given bread, and sworn, and put to work hauling stone. "Better than corpses," Jon said to Tyrion as they watched the captured men sleep like men who had never slept. "Better than iron in the stomach of the bay." "Better," Tyrion agreed, "though there will be no song for it. Songs prefer iron." "That is why we will make laws," Jon said, "so that when the song fails us, there will still be a sentence." They took a census. They found families who had lived on tiny islands of survivable ground through the centuries, speaking of Valyrian that had learned to chew on salt, eating fish that were embarrassed to be caught by such stubborn people. They brought them in and gave them roofs that did not steam in summer. In return, those people gave them words they had not known they needed. Names for winds that moved sideways, names for fish that hid under the glass, names for a patience that had learned that patience could not be the only virtue. An old woman gave Daenerys a ring made of copper hammered thin as a promise and called her daughter in a dialect that made the word daughter sound like argue and grace. A child gave Jon a shell and told him it was from a beach her grandmother had been born on that was no longer a beach but a thought of one. And he kept it and wore it on a thong around his neck like a ridiculous lord. At night they would lie together on a bed they had taught to be a bed by bolting 4 legs to a sheet of pride, and he would say, "We are making a kingdom with 2 hearts." And she would say, "A kingdom with 2 roofs." And they would fall asleep to the sound of steam that was no longer angry and of dragons who had learned to purr. When winter finally came to the smoking sea, winter that was not the brutality of the north but a thinning of warmth and a sharpening of wind, the city showed them something else. It opened a door in a place where there had been only a wall. Behind it was a hall of bones not yet calcified, and in the hall a mural of tile and metal leaf. It showed a dragon larger than any living, so large that its eye alone was the size of a cart, shadowing a ship. On the deck of the ship stood a man and a woman. their hands outstretched not in fear, but as if greeting a child returning from a long errand. Behind them a city rose. It was not Valyria. It was a city with a broken dome and a hill that remembered dragons like a dream remembers teeth. King's Landing, Daenerys said softly. The mural had a story in it, and the story said, "We will become each other's legend. The dragon will be the shadow with which one city tells time. The ship will be the line the other draws upon its heart when it needs courage. The two will not devour one another. They will each teach the other a language. They will be a kingdom with two skies." Jon stood before that mural a long time and listened to the breath of the earth. He thought of the boy who had laughed at the word wolf and now toddled in a courtyard that had once been a roof. He thought of the men who had laid their swords down and picked up ropes and hammers, and those who had refused and had been refused by the city in return. He thought of Ghost, who came and went in dreams, his white coat stained with the soot of a place that had no snow. He thought, too, of a different winter, of a night when the dead had walked and had not bothered to call it walking, and of a young man who had died and lived and understood that both had their sneering gods. He had thought his work was to beat back darkness. Now he understood it had another half, for men are happiest when they are required to do two things at once that argue with one another until they make a rope you can trust. The work was to build a place where light could be kept when men grew too sensible for fire. The work was to forbid certain kinds of hunger and to feed the rest. Years stirred and lay down around them like obedient hounds. Children were born with hair that argued about its color. Dragons sired clutches on ledges warmed by honest heat. The markets made jokes about plate that did not crack, and the jokes became customs. Once, a man tried to claim a dragon by painting his arms with ash and screaming at the sky. The sky laughed, and the dragon went to a girl who had been very quiet in her love and knew the names of winds. Laws were written for such things, and the laws were obeyed because the city had learned to enforce them with a light hand and a heavy conscience. Davos grew old as men like him do, in fits, in generous aches, with the knowledge that luck can be taught to behave. Tyrion lost some of his bitterness and kept the rest because it was the salt that made him of use. Grey Worm found himself, to his surprise, a teacher, and then found himself smiling in a doorway for no reason at all. Era disappeared one day when the tide was being unreasonable. She left a sack of chalk and a book of drawings done by a hand that had learned to be pleased with itself. The chalk was put in a glass case. The book was left on a table. The chalk was never used. The book was read by children who grew up and drew their own doors. As for Jon and Daenerys, they learned the art that only a few are granted in their time. The art of stillness without stagnation. They traveled between the cities as seasons dictate. Summer in King's Landing where the sea smells like commerce and poverty. Winter in Valyria where the sea smells like an argument it is winning. He learned to talk to lords again without wishing them gently headless. And she learned to let a council's foolishness play itself out until it grew embarrassed and began to act like wisdom. They fought sometimes like storm and shore. They forgave like tide and moon. They grew lines at the corners of their eyes that spoke of worry and good jokes. On a day when fog hung in the bay like cloth upon a line, Jon stood on the black quay and watched a school of small fish turn as one and flash like a single blade. Drogon passed overhead and the sun went out and came back. Jon thought of the boy he had been, and of the man, and of the other man who had borrowed his face for a time under the snow. He thought of the chair that had accepted and the city that had remembered and the wall that had taught him the value of watchmen. He knew then what kings do not often get to know, that it had been enough. Not perfect, endings are for storytellers too lazy for consequences, but enough. A kingdom had been claimed that had been waiting for a throat. They had not lent it theirs. They had taught it to speak. They had forbidden it to say the forbidden words and taught it to say the necessary ones. They had built a place where dragons were not exceptions to law but examples of it. They had made a sister capital that did not beg a comparison because it had made one for itself. He turned from the quay and went back into the city. There were markets and councils and a child's lesson to attend where wings and wind would be discussed with chalk and laughter. There was a woman who was both queen and the only person on earth who could make him laugh without trying. There were laws to mend and roads to lay and ships to send with plates that did not crack. Above him, the sky changed as it always does and always will. The steam rose and fell. The vents sang. The dragons flew and slept and flew again. The city, accepted and accepting, went on speaking in its slow, articulate tongue. And Jon Snow, who had once been a boy with a name that apologized for itself, walked through the ruins that were no longer ruins and did the stubborn work that makes kingdoms, while the sea rehearsed its old arguments and learned, slowly, the shape of a new reply. In the season when figs left their sweet stains on the market boards and children counted dragon shadows to measure afternoon, the sea gave up a thing it had kept too long. It rose in the black water between the quays like a memory breaching. A bronze buoy, crusted in lime and barnacle, its ring still bright where rope had cut it clean. Fishermen shouted, and ropes sang, and soon the buoy lay on the stones with its belly open and a roll of hammered tin within. The roll was sealed with a stamp that none of them knew and all of them distrusted. It had the look of a wave with an eye in it. Tyrion turned it over in his hands and Daenerys watched without touching. And Jon stood with gray salt drying on his boots and his mind already moving, as minds do when they have learned that letters are shoes for other men's feet. Inside lay maps. Not maps of coasts, those are easy. Maps of wind. Maps of warm seams in the air. Of pillars that rose unseen at dawn and died at noon but could carry a dragon like a lord's chair carries his back. Notes on how the sea breathes when the vents sing certain songs. On how a sail might love or hate a morning depending on the moon's mood. And on the edge of one, inked in a careful hand that had learned early not to blot, a sentence in trade Valyrian. You are not the only ones the city has accepted. Who else? Jon asked aloud, though the map was incapable of answering and the sea did not break its habit for him. Some sailor clever enough to write, stubborn enough to live, Tyrion said. Or a guild with more pride than membership. Or else a man who can spell threat in 3 alphabets and wants to see his letters make soldiers. Daenerys lowered her lashes and looked at the maps as a smith looks at a piece of metal that promises to be both difficult and satisfying. We do not hide, she said. We send word to those who think the city will accept them that the door they knock on opens into our hall. If Valyria has other throats, let them speak where we can hear, and let them take a seat or be shown the quay. They sent out ravens, not because ravens love the smoking sea, but because men love the sight of a black bird bearing a tube of promises. They sent envoys by boat who could read currents the way some read faces. They sent a boy with eyes like wet slate who could charm a horse and a ship, and once, to his own horror, a woman who should have known better. He came back with his ears pink from the slap she had given him and a letter from Pentos promising figs and asking for a clever marriage. They sent Grey Worm's second captain, quiet, efficient, merciless at the right hour, to the islands of men who had learned to live with steam. When he returned, his hair smelled of wet iron and he carried a basket of shells the color of old glass, which he placed without a word on the threshold of the forge. In King's Landing that winter there were fewer beggars and more bakers. The ovens stayed lit when they used to die by midnight. The domes, once broken, grew less ashamed of their repair. A woman in a red shawl began to tell fortunes in the shadow of the dragon pit. She read ash the way others read tea leaves and grew rich enough to own shoes. Children on the hill drew dragons in the dirt with sticks and argued about the number of ribs a proper one ought to have. In the Street of Steel, a boy who had once run with a pack of silent thieves now apprenticed to a smith and learned that some hammers speak softly and some shout, and that shouting does not make a blade honest. Sansa came south with snow still in the Wolfwoods. She stood on the terraced walk that looked out over the Blackwater and watched a dragon drift. Not hunting or patrolling, but simply attending to the grammar of its sky. She wore gray that flashed white at the cuffs and throat, like eyes in a winter bush. Jon came to her with a smile he had not unlearned, and together they let the wind make conversation enough for a time. Your ravens talk of heat and law, she said at last. Of a city where stones answer to sentences. I will be grateful when I see it. You will be skeptical when you see it, he said. Then grateful, then skeptical again. Then you will start giving the vents orders and scolding the steam beds for their table manners. Her mouth curved. I am told steam minds itself no better than lords do. She turned to him and the amusement went quiet. The North is as it has always been and as it has not. Keeps its old songs and hums new ones. It expects you to remember that you were once one of its sons, even as it calls you king in rooms you rarely sit. There are some who would prefer I be harder than I am. There are some who would prefer you were colder than you are. We are neither what they prefer nor what we were. That will have to be a kind of courage. It is the only kind I seem to own, he said. Will you come east and count the ribs of dragons for yourself? I'll come and count plates for your bravosi, she said, and there was a sister's warmth in it, and a queen's thrift. And I will see where my nephew runs when given a square of warm stone and a wing shadow for a companion. Word in the north says he laughs like rain, and I have known too little rain. Arya came quietly, not because she had anything left to hide, but because quiet had become the way she tested rooms that had never held her before. She smelled steam and fish and something like cinnamon in pits, and watched Grey Worm drill men on a terrace whose rail had once been a cornice. She listened to Era's apprentices, because Era herself had left the city with a chalk line in her satchel and a promise never to drown, and judged they were adequate liars capable of telling the truth when it paid better. She found a stair and went down it because stairs are simply invitations written in stone. She found a corridor that did not like to be followed and followed it anyway. She found an archive of beaten tin and read a recipe for a paste that could seal a cracked tile roof even in a heavy rain. And she liked that better than prophecies because roofs keep the world out of beds. She joined Jon at supper that night and ate quietly while Daenerys listened to a fisherman plead his case about a dock that had grown a foot to the left during a tremor and now refused to host his boat. When the man had been given a new berth and a cup of hot wine and a promise of a boy to carry the news to his wife, Arya said, "There are doors here that think too much. Then they belong with us," Tyrion said, lifting his cup. "We are a kingdom of overthinkers and undersleepers." "The doors may be persuaded," Daenerys said, watching Arya with the friendly interest she reserved for other people's knives. "They like chalk and truth spoken without posture. What do you think of the place?" Arya considered, then shrugged. "It's a house that had a bad guest and forgot how to trust. You're teaching it again. Houses like to be taught. They remember. That is kinder than most men are to cities," Tyrion murmured. "I'm not kind," Arya said. "I just know when a thing is trying. This place is trying. So are you. Try harder. Some of your laws are good. Some are clever. Clever isn't the same as good. You know that, don't you? She speaks to us like a septa and a cell's word together," Davos whispered to Jon. "Seven help us, we deserve it. News runs crooked between coasts and straighter along the spines of mountains. It found its way to the Iron Islands in the mouth of a storm. A ship taken off course, its crew rescued by fishermen who did not speak of the ways of men to strangers. The rescued spoke instead of a city that whispered to stone and ordered the wind. In Pike, a priest of the drowned god bellowed in a hall whose salt was 70 years deep. "We are old as storm," he cried. "We will not bow to steam." His congregation shouted back not because they were convinced, but because shouting is what they thought faith was. Asha came to them with salt in her hair and a scar under her left eye that the years had turned into punctuation. "Sail if you like," she said, "and be turned aside like a tongue by a clever tooth, or sail to trade and return with plates that do not crack, and say your wives' names without tasting rust. The new world offers more ways to live than drowned men like to admit." "Then we are not the only ones who need a new liturgy," Tyrion said when Davos brought the news. "Very well, we will write one. It will have fewer gods and more ovens, fewer kings and more scales for weighing fish. And it will have a hymn to ships that keep their decks above their keels. In the 7th year, on a morning shaped like a blade, thin, bright, certain, the vents changed their song. The great city inhaled and did not exhale, as if something hesitated in a stairwell with its hand on the rail. The dragons lifted their heads. Daenerys felt the chair's attention like a hand pressed between her shoulders. Jon felt the caverns count their syllables and decide to speak fewer. "Below," he said, and the word reached the right ears without traveling through the air by any path a man could point to. Grey Worm was already at the door. Missandei, who had learned the law's new music until it came through her fingers when she sorted contracts, put down her stylus and followed, because words are poor companions when the ground is making up its mind. The crack in the gallery had not reopened. The stair they had taught the earth lay where they'd asked it to. But at the bottom, in the hall of bones and unfinished ideas, there was a light where no light belonged. It was not fire. It was the kind of light it comes when a man points a mirror at the sun and draws a circle on a wall. Pulsed, not with heart but with intention. Someone is speaking to it, Era's apprentice whispered, and John wanted Era's laugh, her chalk, her habit of answering the wrong question to make a right answer. He put the thought away and stepped forward. The pulsing light made a figure without making one. It had shoulders without arms, a head without jaw, a posture that might have been supplication or threat. Men often confused the two. When it spoke, it did so through the city itself. The floor gave the word its weight. The walls took the edges off it. We remember, we want. Daenerys stood with her chin lifted in the way that made even old lords behave. What do you want? To continue, said the not voice. To resume, to make. The language was not a language but a music that learned words as it played. You will not take living throats and make them your instruments, Daenerys said. You have taken enough. You will not take again. We will take permission, said the not voice. We will take rule. The word rule came like a pebble striking a table. Small, startling, not to be ignored. Jon put his hand on Longclaw. Rule is for men to give to one another and then to take back. We will not give it to a vent, to a memory, to a thing that cannot be held to a law. We can be held, it said, and the floor warmed as if embarrassed. We can bind ourselves. We can accept a chair. The light moved. The knot figure turned toward the old forge circle with its obsessively paced grooves, toward the cup at its center and the impossible ribs at its edge. In Jon's mind, the chamber acquired a new shape, as if a lover of locks had found a key and wished to show it to the room. No, Daenerys said softly. Not like that. If you will accept law, you will accept it in a hall of law, with witnesses whose hearts beat and fail, with pages that can be torn when they err. We can write, it said, and Jon felt letters, not seen but given like weight to a hand. Then you will come up, he said, and sit in air, and argue, and compromise, and be chastened, or you will stay in your hall and sing to your past until it is the only song you hear. Choose. The light paled, pulsed. It went out and returned smaller, as if it had accepted the humiliation of anatomy. Then it began to climb. It did not climb with legs. This was a city that had forgotten that legs were the most honest way to change your height. It came as heat does, up through shafts and behind walls, opening doors that had no hinges. In the great acceptance hall where the bone iron chair watched like a clever old dog, a stripe of brilliance appeared on a pillar and widened until the room had acquired a second hearth. It trembled there. It gathered itself the way a pen gathers ink at the tip before the first stroke. Then it spoke in the language of men, badly, earnestly, like a student who fears his master and loves the lesson. We accept law. The sentence echoed, grew less theatrical in the echoes, settled into the corners of the room as a statement, not a show. Missandei wrote it down, not because it would be forgotten, but because law begins in writing and ends in habits. Who are you? Tyrion asked gently. What may we call you that is not an insult and not a compliment? We are the part of the city that remembers how to make, it said. We are the will to shape. We are the hunger for form. We are the marrow that asks the bone to grow. We do not have a good name. Your names have weather. Ours have heat. Daenerys inclined her head. Then take one of ours. You are the Ember Word. Considered. The pillar's light wavered as if tasting the word in several mouths. We accept, it said. We are Emberward. We ask to be bound. So they wrote a law for a thing that was not a thing and had never stood beneath a gallows. They bound Emberward to a council of living minds who could be fired or forgiven, to an oath that placed bread before blades, to an audit by men and women from beyond the city who would ask questions a proud stone would not think to ask. Emberward was forbidden the making of flesh and the unmaking of memory. It was forbidden to shape a thing that could not be unshaped. It was forbidden to teach a child to listen to a vent before teaching it to listen to a mother. It agreed. In agreeing, Hall sighed. Tunnels that had thought themselves exceptional learned their place in the central map of the city. Forges above grew steadier because forges below had consented to be less interesting. And in the months that followed, under Emberward's rule and the laws that bit even it, plates that did not crack multiplied, kills learned to cure brick with thrift instead of drama, and a small miracle occurred. A baker in a quarter long allergic to structure began to send loaves of consistent weight and crust, day after day, until neighbors began to trust that morning would taste the way they remembered it. Trust is louder than trumpets and quieter. Spread. Rieger grew with the city. He learned to run with his hands open to the steam, trusted it to kiss his palms without blistering him because his mother had taught the steam to mind him as it would mind a prince who had done nothing yet to deserve either title or neglect. He grew lean as the boys of the north grow, quick as the boys of the Dornish marches grow, and laughed as both do. He learned words in 3 tongues and the syntax of law from Missandei, the ethics of lines from Era's drawings, and the practical grammar of ropes and knots from Davos, who believed in knots the way some men believe in small gods. He loved a dragon who had chosen him because he had not tried to choose it. An auburn she whose left hind talon had grown crooked and thus taught her to land with grace and be more careful than her brothers. He called her Hearth, infuriating half the city who believed dragon names ought to be slightly obscene. Shiwi, and tea where he went and sulked when he studied too long. When Emberward learned to dim a vent to let her sleep better, Rieger wrote a thank you note in careful script and left it on the pillar. Emberward, who was learning the little courtesies of being in a house with people, warmed the note so that it curled slightly but did not burn. Daenerys found the note in the morning with a smile that had not survived many mornings after bells. In the 9th year a boy was taken from a market. Not by chains, not by a man with a sack and a lie, but by a story. A promise of seeing a chamber no one was supposed to see, of skipping a line and meeting a dragon that would like him. This city had known worse crimes. It reacted as if the old crime had returned wearing a fashionable new cloak. The chair grew cold. The vents spoke a chord no one wanted to hear again. Grey worms men flowed through alleys that had once been enemies and were now colleagues. Jon spoke once to the hall, and his words went farther and with more precision than any raven could have managed. They found the boy in a stairwell under a roof that did not belong to itself. He was unharmed and snot-streaked and furious. The man who had taken him was a scholar with a plate in his satchel and a theory about bonds and dragons and boy-kings. His theory had given him permission he had not been given. He faced a court and then a law that was new and a punishment that was older than men. He was put to work where he could do no harm, watched by mothers, cuffed by children, required to copy pages of law until the habit of his hand taught the rest of him to be less inventive. "We will not hang what can be corrected," Daenerys said in that court. "We are not reenacting old songs. We are learning new ones and judging their keys. But hear this. Any man who touches a child without the child's consent touches the city, and the city will pull its hand away hard enough to break fingers." The law took. In King's Landing, copyists traced the new article into books thick as bread loaves. In the north, Sansa sent word that the law would be read under the heart trees where men remembered they were children once. In the islands of the steam stubborn, a woman wise from fish and grief baked the law into cakes and fed it to her neighbors and said, "Now you have learned it. Don't tell me you forgot." The other cities learned as well. Volantis, chastened by its defeat and too proud to admit the word, sent a philosopher to argue with Emberward. He arrived in boots polished enough to show a man the state of his hair and began with a sentence that had made him notorious in salons. "All governance is an arrangement of appetites. Virtue is merely a timing." Emberward listened and answered in quiet thermals that made the candles wobble but did not go out. The philosopher stayed 3 months, left with shoes polished by honest dust, and wrote a book called Humility of Heat that got him banned from his patrons' tables and very popular with men who make bricks. Bravos sent auditors with abacuses and an honest affection for sums. They were suspicious of dragons and made to love plates. "A plate that does not crack is an argument that does not end in insult," the lead auditor said. looking slightly ill at how much he meant it. They took their tithe in salt and plates as agreed, and brought Daenerys a mask from a private collection, the face of a woman whose eyes were closed and yet saw. "We do not worship faces," he said softly, "but we honor them when they have looked at cities with love and demanded to be answered." Daenerys did not wear the mask. She placed it on a shelf in the hall where Emberward glowed and Missandei wrote and Tyrion sighed and Jon paced. It made the room feel watched and more careful. The faceless men came not as knives but as questions. A child with too straight posture asked to apprentice in the law and was politely refused. A cobbler offered shoes for the dragons, meaning nothing and everything, and was thanked, and his feet were watched. A girl bought chalk and drew doors where there were none and was told, with courtesy, to draw them on paper first. One morning, Missandei found a coin on her table. A coin of no city, lighter than it should have been, heavy with suggestion. She laughed, and the sound made even Emberward warmer. "If you mean to test us," she said to the empty air, "choose a test that is not a child's trick. Come sit here and argue and be made smaller in the right places. Or go wet your coin and see if it buys you a tide." They went or stayed in the way such men do, and Valyria continued to insist that authority would be earned here without masks, with patience and the public's bad breath. There was famine in the Riverlands that year when the late frosts bruised the barley and made the beer taste like a man had wept in it. The new Valyrian kills learned to cure clay in half the wood and 3/4 the time. Potters in Fairmarket wrote letters of thanks to a queen who had not asked for their thanks and sent her bowls with rims that pleased the hand. The ships ran a path between the quays of black glass and the mouth of the Trident, and when the jars of grain were unloaded in halls that had once stored swords, a woman in a patched green dress put her hand on her son's head and said, "Dragons don't eat us anymore, they feed us." The boy, who had only known dragons as shadows and plates that did not crack, shrugged and asked if the bread would be warm. Jon returned to the wall with 200 men and the memory of a third life heavy in him. He stood before stones that had stopped pretending to be ice and spoke the old vows so softly they became new ones. "Night gathers," he said, and men who had come from courts and forges and ships said the words back as if learning the music of a place they had been humming anyway. They set posts where the wall had taught men to be lazy. They asked the free folk for advice and were given it. With mockery and true care, they built towers that watched without making the wild feel watch too much. They banned kings from the wall and allowed them to visit so long as they came as watchmen and left as grateful visitors. When he descended, he did not feel younger. He felt exactly the age he was, and that is rarer and harder and better. A letter arrived from Old Town written in a hand that had had letters beaten into it in youth and had learned to bend anyway. The Archmaester of Architecture wished to come and observe what he called the urban respiration of a resurrected capital, which is how maesters say they want to see whether the place breathes. He came with 2 apprentices and a chronicler who had the face of a man destined to be mocked and then quoted. He stayed a year, then another, then married a potter and retired from archmaestership under the scandalized stares of men who think marriage is a hobby. He wrote a book without chains called The Obedient City and sent a copy to Sansa, who read it and laughed and wrote him back that the only obedient city is one that has learned not to make obedience an idol. Threats did not cease. They changed their clothes. A sect in Karth promised immortality through steam and died from simple fevers when their boiled water learned to love them less. A prince in Myr declared himself Dragonhand and burned his signature into letters. Then came to Valyria and learned that the chair knows when a man has learned his name from a mirror. He went home with a temperance and a plate. A prophet rose on the stepstones and claimed the doom had been a single long breath and that the sea had been holding it for a sign. She came to Valyria, took off her shoes, walked across a field of black glass, and wept. "I was wrong," she said, and her believers, bewildered by a prophet who loved truth more than their belief, wrote her a new gospel consisting mostly of recipes for fish and poems about learning to admit the sun is warm. The hardest threat came from within. It came quietly, as certain kinds of cat do, and sat on the lip of the bed until they opened their eyes. "Let us make a legion," a counselor said. Not a venal man, not stupid, a man who had learned fear in the right places and was trying to be its steward. Not for conquest, for security, a dragon legion, armed with spears tipped in obsidian against what may yet come from the far wastes if winter decides it was not finished. A disciplined, uniformed, named and numbered force the city can call its own. "We have guard," Tyrion said gently. "Good men. Enough. More than enough for a city that writes laws faster than it writes ballads." "Guards cannot fly," the counselor said. "And we have dragons. And your Emberword can teach forges to spit grief in jars if we let it. There are clever men in lists who learn to be cruel when cleverness fails. There are old men in castles who, when they hear the word Valyria, shiver and then make noises about contingencies. We could be prepared." Daenerys listened. Jon listened. They dismissed the council and went to the balcony where the sea draws its own breath. They spoke quietly, as people do who would rather be lovers than rulers and find themselves required to be both. "We will need," Daenerys said, "to prepare for the day when preparedness looks too much like hunger." "It looks like that now," Jon said. "We can drill. We can write plans and lock them behind laws that do not open easily. But if we name a legion, give it colors and a drum, the city will hear the drum through the floor and begin to dance before we do. Emberword will warm in that direction. The vents will remember the old halls, and some boy will put his hand on a spear and feel that it fits better than his spoon does. And that is the beginning of a song we have sworn not to sing." She nodded, and in her eyes the old fire argued with the newer law and did not win or lose. "Then we write a countersong. We will establish a school for dragon riders and forbid its colors from being war. We will teach weather and law before formation and pursuit. We will drill evacuations. We will farm the sky. And if the day comes that an enemy requires us to be soldiers, we will be soldiers for a day and go back to being rulers the next." "The city," Emberword said with something like a child's chiding. "Do you not gender things you love?" "We do," Tyrion said, and thought of ships, and of the way men say she, when they mean to praise the sea for not killing them. "Can we ask her to do it?" Slowly. "We can ask," Emberword said. "She will answer in lands and inches." They made walls to channel the new flow and placed guards where the glass would cool before curious boys could put their fingers into it. They taught the fishermen a new channel to use and showed them on plates etched with patient lines. They wrote a law forbidding the making of islands without communal consent, and Emberword signed it with a gust that kissed the ink and made it dry like a blush. The mouth calmed. The new tongue of land cooled into a promontory where lovers would later walk and old men would later spit into the sea and say that it had learned manners. "We are becoming immoderate in our satisfaction," Davos groused gently to Jon as the two watched the promontory from a skiff with a cask of beer for ambitions. "Last time I saw a city pleased with itself, it was about to have its teeth knocked loose." "Then we hire a good dentist," Jon said, "and write a law about humility, and visit the wall more, and eat with the bakers once a week and listen when they say the ovens are temperamental." "A king who listens to bakers," Davos said, "will be a cake widower, but maybe he'll be wiser." He thumped the cask. "We'll drink to ovens that mind their mood and to a city that remembers to ask who eats last." The last threat came in a letter and a storm. The letter was written in ink that had learned to be beautiful by practicing cruelty. It came from Norvos, of all places, signed by a council who believed in beards and discipline. It suggested that Valyria's experiment had grown untidy, and that a shepherd needed a shepherd, and that Norvos, with its towers and bells, might provide one. It was not signed with a wave with an eye in it. It was signed with 7 hands. The storm came 2 weeks later, born in a corner of the sea men seldom watched and thus believed to be harmless. It turned complicated in a day and vindictive in 2. It came not as the old storms did, straightforward with shouting, but as the new world demands, oblique with questions. The waves rose and did not fall. The wind blew from several directions as if the sky had begun to argue with itself, and ships that had been well made and better named found themselves learning humility. They could have fought it with dragons. They did not. They used the school. They shadowed barges and made them turn when pride would not. They took farmers off decks and put laws into the mouths of vent keepers who controlled the wind's indulgence. They asked Emberword not to be clever but to be consistent, and Emberword obeyed like a steward proud to be plain. They lost 3 boats. They saved 20. A child was born on a pier with steam easing his mother's pain and a dragon making a roof of its wing. The child was named Kettle and would later be a magistrate with a love of plain talk and gruel. When the storm had worn itself out against the patience of a city and the refusal of her rulers to be dramatic, Daenerys called for ink and paper and wrote Norvos back. She thanked them for their concern and invited them to send auditors of storm. She included copies of the laws against hunger and the charters of the riding school. She suggested they might enjoy plates that do not crack. She sealed the letter not with a dragon but with a circle carved around a loaf. That, Tyrion said, is the most brutal letter I have ever had the privilege to send. It is not brutality, she said, watching the seal dry. It is a suggestion that they come eat before they presume to cook. In the 10th year, Rhaegar fell. It was not a fall of tragedy. It was the kind of fall that boys take when they learn their legs are longer than they were, amplified by a dragon's shoulder and a ridge that was less steady than a mother would like. He fell and broke his arm in a clean, useful break. He swore with learning and cried with anger and insisted on walking with his sling. He learned to tie knots with one hand better than most men do with 2. He learned to sit and listen longer than he wanted to. He learned that the city breathes even when he does not make it laugh. It is good, Jon said softly that night as they watched him sleep. His hair stuck to his brow and his mouth open a little. It teaches him that the sky and the ground are both honest masters. It teaches me that I am not finished being frightened, Daenerys said, and pressed her forehead to Jon's shoulder. And for a moment she was a girl in a house with a red door and a woman under a sky knives had learned to love, and a queen with a chair that accepted and a mother with a son who had fallen and not been broken by it. When spring came to a sea that calls its winter something else, the city gave them a gift unasked for and relentlessly right. It opened a canal that none of them had drawn. It ran between 2 markets that had grown jealous of each other's customers and argued in ways that might have grown cruel. It gave them water to carry beer and plates and beans and children. It offered 3 new bridges and the habit of crossing. On the 2nd day, Rhaegar, arm mended well and fussed over, stood with a chalk sack and wrote a sentence above the new water on a stone that had agreed to be written on. A bridge is a law that people enjoy keeping. Emberward warmed. Missandei smiled. Grey Worm nodded in that way of his that meant his heart had been moved and he would never tell you how. Tyrion went home and wrote a speech and never gave it because it was not needed. The years followed, not storyless and never simple, but with a rhythm that men can learn without fear. The North remained itself and therefore loyal. The Riverlands remembered how to trust the sky's temper. The islands of stubborn steam raised daughters who could read law and sons who preferred rope neatly coiled to God's roaring. King's Landing learned to sleep in summer without waiting for the sound of bells. Volantis learned to write fewer letters in Butif. Alink. Bravos learned that a debt paid in decent bread can be more profitable than gold miscounted on purpose. Old Town learned that a book without chains is not an insult but a compliment to the hands that wrote it. Valyria was claimed and did not become a weapon. She became a sister and a stern one, the kind who corrects your posture and warms your hands. The dragons nested and flew and died and were mourned and hatched again. Men grew old and laughed at how young they had been when they believed that law would always need a sword to lean on. Women held councils and put flour on their aprons and ink on their fingers. Children grew up in courtyards where steam made polite noises and learned to count ribs and not to tug tails. Emberward glowed through it all, warming law, dimming for sleep, accepting correction, delighted when thanked, scolded when proud. A steward who had once been a hunger and had learned to be a habit. And Jon Snow, who had walked out of 1,000 doors, kept walking. He went to the wall and the wolfwood and the hill with the broken dome and the hall with the chair that accepted. He ate with bakers and listened to the way a city breathes when it is pleased and when it is not. He fought once, in a yard where a man came with a knife and a story to justify it. He disarmed him and then made him read a day's worth of law until his excuses learned that sentences can be kinder and more final than steel. He stood beside Daenerys in winter and in summer and in days that have no name because they are only days and are the ones that hold kingdoms up. He watched his son fall and not be broken and fly and not be proud. He learned, finally, what it is to be enough and to be required again tomorrow, and to meet that requirement without speeches. On a morning when fog lay thin as silk and the ships wore their quiet like good coats, he woke before the dragon pit's breeze began to move the curtains and went alone to the balcony that looked toward the new promontory. He breathed. He listened. He heard the city speak in all its voices. Vent and baker, law and dragon, child and widow, coin and plate, stone and chalk, and the soft friction of a world that has decided to live with you because you have decided to live with it. Behind him Daenerys stirred and said his name not as summons or as solace, but as a sweetness that had learned its work. He turned. He went in. The day began, ordinary as bread, demanding as law, miraculous as breath. The city kept speaking. They kept answering. And the sea, unreconciled and grateful, rehearsed its old arguments and learned, tide by tide, to admit that it had been wrong about at least one thing.